Thank you for joining us for Jane Cazort's funeral. I'm Jane Cazort's niece, Beth Cazort Young. Aunt Jane specifically requested that her service be held at First Methodist Church in Little Rock. She worshiped here, and the congregation has been very important part of the life of our family for 3 generations. Jane's maternal grandfather, my great-grandfather, William Mitchell McIntosh, known affectionately as Daddy Mac, was a Methodist minister and circuit rider in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. His daughter, my grandmother Willie Mae, deeply loved the Methodist Church. My grandparents were active members of First Methodist Church in Little Rock for decades and spent countless hours working to beautify the grounds. A brass lantern dedicated to the memory of my father, Aunt Jane's brother, Guy Cazort Jr., lights the courtyard here. My brother, Guy Cazort III, who will be reading the Bible verse later in this service, and I were both baptized here in the 1950s. We are so thankful to be able to have Aunt Jane's service in this beautiful and meaningful church. The service is about 25 minutes, followed by a 20-minute slideshow documentary of Jane's life. Please join us for the visitation afterwards. Another hour or so of meaningful, humorous stories and remembrances about Aunt Jane.
Yeah. So here and now, we have gathered to thank God for the gift of life, especially the gift the world knew as Jane McIntosh Cazort. May God's presence be felt among us as we bear witness to a life well lived and a gift freely shared. Let us pray. O Lord, support us all the day long until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over and our work is done. Then in thy mercy, grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. Amen. Not only is it a connection with Jane that brings us together at this moment, but one of the threads that unites people across space and time is Scripture.
To everything, there is a season. To everything, there is a time, a purpose for everything under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to count as lost. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. And 11, 12, and 13. God has made everything beautiful in its time. There is nothing better for man to do than to rejoice and do good while he lives. May God bless this reading of his word. May God bless you all watching, and Aunt Jane and Uncle Fred.
It is the scriptures and song that connect us to a place beyond ourselves. But it's the sharing of our stories, our memories, the lessons that we have learned from one another that connects us in this space and in this time. And it's those stories that we want to hear about Jane, that the reason that we are here and how she has touched so many. There are 2 people who are going to share specifically today, and the first is Martha.
I am Martha Presley Turner. My parents are Larry and Pat Presley. My mama and Aunt Jane were first cousins. And our families were always close. There's one photo I've seen. I would love to know who has it. But it's a picture of my Uncle Jack, my Uncle Cozy, Aunt Jane, and Aunt Flo Baby, and they're all in England during World War II. Aunt Jane served in the Red Cross, and so did Aunt Flo Stevenson. And I have entered them in the Women's Military Memorial as women of service. But one of the things I wanted to tell you is that Aunt Jane was a role model for me. I loved her independence, her spirit, her curiosity, her travel. I went on when I was single. I was single till I was 37. I went on a fall foliage tour, a bus tour, and by myself. And I mean, why not? Well, Aunt Jane went to Normandy when she was 100. So it's either her spirit that I have, or it's just genetic. It's kind of funny that all the pictures I have of Aunt Jane that I sent to Jane Hardy, they're all from the reunion, the Cazort Garner reunion. And anytime Aunt Jane was in town or after she retired, she went, just as my parents did, just as I do now as an adult. And I think that that's what she would want most, is for you all to carry on. Friday night, we get for dinner, have a business meeting. Saturday, we go to Lamar for a day of service on our cemetery. So if Lamar is closer, then join us then. But I think Aunt Jane would love that. Thank you, Jane, for the opportunity.
And now Cynthia.
I'm Cynthia Cazort Collins, one of Aunt Jane's nieces. Cousin Beth loves to tell the story of my brother Alan sitting as a toddler with our grandparents in Arkansas, watching a show on TV about orphans. The adults in the room were sad, and so Alan blurted out, "Doesn't everyone have an Aunt Jane?" In his mind, everything and everyone was all right in the world as long as they had an Aunt Jane. And he was absolutely right. Lucky, lucky us to have had the most remarkable aunt and friend. Her 10 nieces and nephews, all of whom she treated equitably, as well as her many adopted children from around the world, most especially England. She was our biggest cheerleader, a confidant, another mom, and the woman who said yes. Yes to everyone, everything, and everywhere. Life was an adventure, and every stranger a potential friend. Whether we were reporting good news or bad, it most always was met with, "Well, you don't mean it." For all of us, the house on the magical creek of number 1 Sunset Circle was a respite. There lived our unconditional and deep loving heroes, our amazing grandparents, and our most beloved Aunt Jane, a trifecta of perfect love. The house even had a big magnolia tree, which not surprisingly, Aunt Jane would climb with us way until her late 70s. She wasn't a spectator. She was the MVP star player of the sport called life. It is no coincidence that after her 18 years in Europe, she then became a notorious librarian for the next 30. Her own life was indeed an epic novel authored by her own choices. Choices bravely made during a time when most women weren't making their own. While her peers were getting married, some of who she perceived as doing so out of social expectations, she decided to take a different route, one that changed the trajectory of her life forever. She joined the Red Cross and moved to England in 1944, in the midst of World War II still raging. While living in London, she often hid in bomb shelters, enemy planes relentlessly flying above and decimating the city. She would often recount that experience and believed that if Americans had lived through that same horror on our own soil, then we wouldn't be so anxious to go to war, stay in war, glorify war. And yes, that was political. Just as she would say that she was certain our founding fathers were not envisioning neighbors carrying around assault rifles when they wrote the Second Amendment. In 2016, she proudly wore a Hillary button and campaigned all over Richland Place, explaining that she too was from Little Rock And wasn't it high time that we had a woman in the White House? She'd waited a century after all. When I asked her years before how she reconciled having her baby brother's unfailing allegiance to Rush Limbaugh, she told our dinner party, "I love your father very much. I just don't particularly like him most of the time." Perhaps the funniest part was that my dad was at that dinner party and she sat right there laughing along with the rest of us. Her delivery was direct, blunt, and brutally honest. Her quick wit unparalleled, and no one was immune to her eye-rolling, sarcasm, or point-blank opinions. She could be a bit feisty too, especially if she thought you were trying to control her or, God forbid, organize her house. Yet her kindness was boundless, her curiosity borderless, and her positivity legendary. She listened and was interested in everyone and everything. Prince or pauper, it didn't matter to her. She wanted to know you. She would laughingly say that her longevity was due to no husband or children, but make no mistake, that was her choice because she had had countless suitors and numerous proposals. She most certainly made sure you knew that. When her friends started having grandchildren, she said every time they got together, everyone would pull out photos of their offspring. It was just so dreadfully boring, she reported. So she started to take out photos of her two dogs, Trouble and Carly, and regaled the group with tennis ball stories and the musical phrase, "Here comes trouble." She was the best dog mama. Her appetite for books was insatiable, her thirst for knowledge unquenchable, her memory so robust that her IQ felt otherworldly. At age 103, I watched her play the weekly trivia game at Richland Place. As usual, she won every single round. When asked how many countries does the equator pass through, she quickly blurted out 13. The director did not ask which ones, but Aunt Jane went on to name 10 and then was very frustrated with herself for not remembering the last 3. No one in the room had any clue what she was talking about. So then the man decided to change the topic to something that would give the others a chance to win. Foliage. Which flowers are also trees in Nashville? Up went Aunt Jane's hand as she named magnolias, dogwood, plum, redwood. She had won again. Yes, she was competitive, but perhaps even more than that, she was also cheap. You see, with each game she won, she received dinner vouchers for guests, which she regularly used because she had so many friends. She may have been frugal, but contrarily, she possessed the most generous spirit of all. Her table was always full. She loved people and she loved to laugh. I know all of us miss that laugh so darn much, even though many times it was at the expense of one of us. She loved hosting cocktail parties, lunch bunch, etc. Her home was always filled with a diverse, multi-generational group who definitely came to be with her, not for her food. Many times, both the wine and the food were expired. To Aunt Jane, that was inconsequential because she hated wasting food. And she usually used the expiration date as a teachable moment. The severity of the Great Depression and how none of us realized just how fortunate we were to be living in such abundance. And then, as usual, she would laugh it off and tell the group she had no interest in cooking anyway. Aunt Jane was the most voracious reader, frequently reading a few novels a week, at least. Cousin Jeannie made sure she was always in possession of the newest bestsellers long before they were released to the public. How incredible that all of us had Aunt Jane, who not only gave us personalized books as children, but then to later give us book recommendations, which were usually followed by meaningful analysis and robust conversations about the topic du jour. The last novel she recommended to me was at age 102, The Nightingale, the true account of a female Allied spy who traversed the Pyrenees during World War II. Perhaps Aunt Jane loved that book so much because she could see some of herself in it, for she was also a pioneer and she also loved the mountains. Snow skiing remained her absolute favorite sport until her late 70s. She loved the outdoors, never wore a drop of sunscreen, and certainly never bothered to buy any fancy face creams. Despite that, she did indeed have the most gorgeous porcelain skin. Wow, what a beauty. At age 95, perhaps the lack of sunscreen caught up with her when she had the one and only surgery of her entire life, a melanoma removed from her cheek. During my 3-day stay as her makeshift nurse, she took not one pain reliever, nor did she ever complain. Instead, she took me down memory lane, recounting endless adventures in the outdoors, water skiing in the Great Lakes, canoeing down the Buffalo, swimming and diving in most of the world's oceans, sailing down the Nile, skiing all over, her favorite slopes in Switzerland. She told me more than once that that big, ugly patch on her cheek was totally worth it. At age 80, she visited Japan and slept on the floor without any complaints for 2 weeks. At age 93, we went to Nicaragua, where she set the record for being the oldest person to ever ride the zip line. At 95, we traveled to Montreal, where she led the group walking tour, oblivious to the blizzard we were all whining about. Her lust for life and love of human connection drove her. Her energy wore most of us out. She delighted in the simple things. Nothing was lost on her, for she could see the beauty and humor in just about anything. But she wasn't naive, nor was she fluffy. She had loved deeply, and she had lost disproportionately, sadly outliving her 5 younger siblings, her beloved Howard, and most of her dearest friends. She had had more than her fair share of pain and loss, yet her perseverance and positivity never wavered. At age 101, she said her recipe was simple: have fun, travel, read, and stay adaptable. Her deep faith, coupled with her unrelenting curiosity, were hallmarks all of us benefited from. Long before practicing gratitude was a catchphrase, she had mastered it. Quite frankly, she may have invented it. She kept people alive in her mind and in ours by recounting their lives through stories, for she was the masterful storyteller. Some years back, I called her excitedly to tell her about a new movie called Dunkirk. Had she heard of it? Had she seen it yet? She retorted quickly, "Oh dear, you don't mean it. Have I heard of Dunkirk? How ridiculous. Not only was I living in England at that time, but I was also in Dunkirk while it was happening. Yes, my dear, of course I know Dunkirk." And then we both burst out laughing. Who on earth could keep up with her epic life? It was impossible. The only person to actually possess that ability to remember everyone's life was Aunt Jane. She wanted every detail of everything and everyone, and she asked for nothing in return, except a phone call, but most preferably a visit. Inevitably and most certainly, Aunt Jane usually started and ended all conversations with, "When are you coming to see me?" During one such visit, my children came out of her bedroom with white hair wigs on their heads and in their hands. The costumes were met with laughter, and then my investigating under her bed, then reporting to Aunt Jane that it was pretty messy under there. She quickly snapped back without a bit of irony and said, "Well, of course it's dirty, my dear. My housekeeper is blind." Well, there was her generosity of spirit, once again in overdrive. How eternally grateful we are to you, Aunt Jane, for showing us that 100+ years could indeed be marvelous. You gave us the most beautiful gift of all. You gave us you, your full attention, your time, your open heart, your open door, your counsel, your laughter, your commitment to understanding who each of us were, your honesty, your non-judgmental affirmations, even when you didn't agree, and your deep, devoted, unconditional love. At the end of her life, while holding hands, I asked her if she had any regrets. In her typical style, with her baby blue eyes sparkling, she said with clarity and perfect intonation, "Well, of course I have regrets, my dear. I never did make it to Poland."
Thank you, Cynthia. That really helped to bring Jane among us, and I'm sure flood each of you with tremendous memories and images. We have John now reading Ithaca.
Hello from London. I'm with my wife, Mary.
Hello.
And just very briefly, before I read the poem, to say how thrilled and excited I am to be part of this. I couldn't have imagined it. I had the best holiday of my life in just outside Washington, in Alexandria, with the Hardy family. And to have a message from the young Jane, she was all of 9, I suppose, when I last saw her 60 years ago, to say that Jane Cazort had lived to 105, I thought was just so absolutely wonderful. So anyway, I can't say how much it's fun to be here, and it's great to be here, and to celebrate Jane. Now, I've been asked to read a poem called Ithaca by Constantine Kofafi. He was a very good, wonderful Greek poet who lived in Egypt, and this was in the first half of the 20th century. And this poem refers to Homer's Odyssey, but you don't need to know that. All you need to know is it talks about a place we all want to go to, and it doesn't say what that place is, and then it calls it Ithaca. So here we go. It's called Ithaca, and it goes like this. As you set out for Ithaca, hope the voyage is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Laestrygonians and Cyclops, angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. You'll never find things like that on your way, as long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit and your body. Laestrygonians and Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them along inside your soul, unless your soul sets them up in front of you. May there be many a summer morning when, with what pleasure, what joy, you come into harbors seen for the first time. May you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy fine things, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, the sensual perfume of every kind, as many sensual perfumes as you can. And may you visit many Egyptian cities to gather stores of knowledge from their scholars. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. Arriving there is what you are destined for. But do not hurry the journey at all. Better if it lasts for years. So you are old by the time you reach the island, wealthy with all you have gained on the way, not expecting Ithaca to make you rich. Ithaca gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you would not have set out. She has nothing left to give you now, and if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you will have understood by then what these Ithacas mean.
There have been words of peace and joy and celebration shared in this time together. I wholeheartedly encourage you to grab hold of these images of Jane, the very best of who she is and the life she led, and let that resonate in you and take root, and so you can share that with the world. She was a gift, and we are so thankful for the life, that she lived. We thank God for that and for the legacy that she leaves behind that is now in the tender care of each and every one of you. Let us be in prayer. God of us all, your love never ends, and for that we are profoundly grateful. When all else fails, you are still God. This day, we wrap our arms around the joy that we have felt, and we pray to you for one another. Be a blessing to us. Meet us in our need, and be with all anywhere who mourn with us this day, and who give thanks with us this day. To those who doubt, lend your light. To those who are weak, may they know your strength. And to all who have lost their way, shine their light so they come back to you. Finally, to all who sorrow, may they be filled with your peace. Lord, we ask that you would keep true in us the love with which we hold one another. And in all our ways, may we trust in you. Amen. This concludes the formal part of our service. Now we will go to a slideshow, which has been affectionately termed documentary, because as you've heard, Jane's life was so long and so full, it's hard to contain in just a few short minutes. Hopefully that is what we'll play next on your screens, and you can enjoy that. And then we can go back to gallery view and share some time together during a visitation.
Only
100 years ago.
Came up and looked at me and she said, "Miss Willie Mae, I think your baby's pretty, even if my mother did say it was ugly." I had to go to St. Louis to apply, and I put on my best black suit and a bright green hat and white gloves and black pumps, and I went to St. Louis to be interviewed. And she said, "Well, what talents do you have?" And she said, "You don't play an instrument?" And I said, "No, but I can smile and talk." And she said, "But you don't have a college degree?" And I said, "No, but my parents were both college graduates, and I had a grandfather who was a college president, and I got something by osmosis." And they took me. And of course, it really changed my life. It was the best thing that could possibly happen to me.
Us too.
So I've been very thankful. I've been very, very lucky. You know, I mean, imagine being stationed in Paris for about 9 months. And that was just pure luck, because a friend of mine was sent there as service club director. This is after I was after the Red Cross days. But she was service club director, and she asked that I go with her. and it was approved. And there I was, just pure luck, because I had this friend who was assigned over there. And then when it was time, I was stationed in England, of course, for 8 years later on. And I was thinking I was getting more British than the British. And by the way, the Hardys were over there for 4 years.
3
while
years.
I was there, which was wonderful, of course.
Miss Cazort began her work with service clubs during World War II when she was sent overseas with the Red Cross Service Club program. After the war, the Red Cross turned their service club responsibilities over to the military. Miss Cazort remained with the organization and served with the U.S. Army Service Clubs until her assignment to England, when she transferred to the Air Force Service Clubs organization. During her years, Miss Cazort has served abroad in England, Germany, Paris, France, Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and Denver, Colorado.
One last thing to say. I don't care what you hear about Hillary. She is a wonderful, wonderful woman. And when you think of all the candidates, she's the only one that's really qualified. Those are my last words to you. problems.
Well, I was thinking of out on the islands when y'all rented a car and went to
That was Fiji.
yeah, Fiji.
Fiji. We go from Sri Lanka to Fiji.
Fiji was fascinating, but they have an herb called kava. I guess there's lots of kava around, but it's a mild narcotic. And Jennifer was determined that we were going to take some kava. So we rented a car, started off, and the worst roads you ever saw. I've never seen anything in the States begin to compare to it. And then we came to this broad river. It was a very shallow river, but it was very broad. And Jennifer said, I just can't drive back over that. And of course, it was left hand. Anyway, I couldn't drive the car. It was a shift. And about that time, a native showed up. And he said, I'll drive your car across. So we got out and we walked across the river. I mean, of course, there was a ford there, you know. There was a water was running over it, but there was a ford there. And we joined hands with a woman that was there, and we walked across the river. And this man drove our car across. And it was beginning to get dark, and the next thing we knew, we were stuck in a mud hole. And we didn't have any water, we didn't have any food, we didn't have any insect repellent, and there was no lights anywhere. We were in the mountains. And so we assumed we would be there the rest, the night anyway. But here came a man with a bullock. He said he'd go back and get his other bull, and the two bulls would pull us out of the hole. But about that time, the man that had driven us across the river came up with a truck. And they got us out of the hole. And we got in the truck, or we could stay in the car, I guess, but anyway, somebody else drove instead of Jennifer. And we went to their village. Well, then the Methodist minister, the Methodist missionaries, couldn't think of it, had gotten there first, so this village was Methodist. So I told them I was a Methodist.
And you really were. That was strategic.
And of course it was dark by this time, and we had to spend the night. So all the women of the family and the tribe were in another room, but we were the guests of honor, so we were in there with the men, and we were seated in the room, and they proceeded with Jennifer's call that she gave to the Kava ceremony. And I, being the oldest person there, even at that time, was given the first drink out of the coconut shell that was the kava. So I did whatever they did. I've forgotten now what it was I was supposed to say, and I said whatever it was I was supposed to say. Then we passed the coconut shell to the next person.
And how was it?
Well, it wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't very pleasant. It was just, I never got a kick out of it.
Okay.
was a duchess at the pageant in San Antonio, the annual pageant they have. And it's a big thing in San Antonio. It's the big thing in the social life of San Antonio. And so I was invited, and I needed a dress. And I went to a resale place there in Little Rock and found the perfect dress. It was just exactly right. It fit me perfectly, and it was just right for the occasion. So I wore it, and there was a big party before the pageant, and I went to it, and I was waiting for the rest of my party to come. I was in the atrium of this building, and this nice-looking man came up to me and said, "How charming you look." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Thank you for wearing my dress." And it was Victor Costa.
102nd birthday, what advice would you like to give the world?
Moderation in all things. That's Voltaire's motto.
Beautifully said.
I saw some thumbs up. Thank you. And thank you to my son, Will Hardy-Katitsky. And for all of you who sent photographs in, and all of you who I videotaped in the last few years and put you on there, Austin and the others. So now we're going to turn it over to John Cazort Hardy.
All right. Well, so this portion of the service for Aunt Jane, the world champion hide and seek player and member of the Secret Rhubarb Society, we're going to just ask everybody to, if they have stories that they want to tell, we would love to hear them one at a time. Donna, thank you for all you have done to put this service together and to lead us through all these memories, fond memories of Aunt Jane, and what a dear service this has been. Who would like to lead us off?
Okay. My name is Debbie McSwain, and I think this is one of the most moving, wonderful services that I have ever been involved in. And your family is amazing. When your Aunt Jane is on there, Jane was able to come one year. 2015 was quite a year to be recognized, but one of the biggest recognitions was Mrs. Obama's staff was there, and they each recognized Jane and her fellow World War II women that were there. And I had the honor of being able to read a story that each one of them told us about their time in World War II. I call them their buddies because they always stuck together whenever we had a get together, but they loved everybody else. I served in Vietnam, others had served in Korea. And again, the women were honored there. But the big deal was on Saturday night to the Red Cross. But this particular night, these 5 women were going to be the honored guests. And again, I got to read their stories. Uniforms next to each one of them, they were standing on a spot, and all the spotlights were on them. And they had beautiful big screens in different.
Debbie, if your bandwidth is low, if you want, I can complete the story for you. This is Martha Underkoffer.
Martha, that might be great because there was some interruption there. So that would be great.
Okay, I'll complete her stories, and Debbie, don't hold it against me if I do it wrong. And then if I might, I will tell my Jane stories.
I won't.
But it was a wonderful night. Jane and Marge Gully and Maxine Taylor and my mother were all honored. Debbie did a fantastic job. These were the largest donors to the American Red Cross. And these ladies, I'm sure after they got done with their stories and their interactions with them, raised a few $1 million for the American Red Cross that night. Because earlier, before everybody got on, whenever I would describe Jane, this is how I would describe her. She was a very refined, antebellum woman. And she would be sitting on the front porch of a very nice home in a rocker with her gloves on. And she would be sitting in the rocker with the lap rug on. You picture it, that's Aunt Jane. And under the lap rug would be a .45 and her finger would be on the trigger. She was not going to take guff from anybody. But she had a good sense of humor. I spent 2 weeks with her driving her from Nashville at 100 years old and my mother for the 100th birthday party. And I was not in charge, even though So those are my Jane stories.
Wonderful.
Jane,
Okay.
I'm so proud and so happy ever to know you. You are such an inspiration to me and my whole family. Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Henny, it's great to see you. All of us send our love to you.
Thank you.
I first met Jane back when with Mr. and Mrs. Cazort, Willie Mae, and in Little Rock when she was a state librarian. And she carried on after Mr. and Mrs. Cazort died with the tea, having everybody in the neighborhood, not everybody, but several of us, constantly coming down for tea. And she'd share books, we'd all compare books, and she would tell us a lot about the times in Europe and some of the prisoners of war and that she had contacts with. And then when I moved to, well, we would also, that same little group, we'd go out to dinner and we'd try to go to different ethnic ones all the time. And we had a wonderful time doing that. Then when I moved to Ashburn, Virginia, she would come, as you all know, to the memorial services at the Red Cross annually. And then she would spend a few days over, excuse me, with me. I'd pick her up at the hotel. And frequently we would drive all over Loudoun County, visiting the small towns. When she got where she was too weak, we would just drive randomly through the county, which was rural. But on one of her trips when she was there, we went to Arlington Cemetery, and there was a wonderful, brand new at that time, building dedicated to the women who served in World War II. And if any of you haven't been there, it's well worth going to. And she looked up one of her cousins and brought up the picture. There was information, and I urged Jane to enter her own picture and information, and I don't think she ever did. She seemed rather reluctant, but it should be in there. One thing I really want to know, when she was talking about all of her prisoners of war, one of them, as you know, painted that wonderful painting of Jane, that huge painting that was in the living room. And I wonder who has that. So perhaps somebody will offer that information, because it was a wonderful painting. And I think that's about all, except she had, as you all know, a wonderful sense of humor and was very gung-ho in everything. I remember when Bumpers, the senator, was running, and she went down, his wife had that Peace Corps thing. She went down to the state capitol and would wave pennants, with the group who are going for peace. And I was against Bumper. But Jane, we could disagree and laugh about our differences, which you don't see today, but we did. And I had a dump bump sticker on my car. And when we'd go some places, she'd always laugh and say, I don't know if I should really ride in your car. But she was wonderful. And as you all know, it was just a joy to be around her every minute. And thank you very much for letting me share those little things.
Thank you, Yvonne. Appreciate it. That's wonderful.
Can you see me, John?
Hi,
We
John.
can see you. Good morning, Pat.
Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon. Well, I just wanted to say a quick story. This is in 1997. Aunt Jane, Fred, and Pat Cazort, and myself took an Amtrak train trip from Chicago to Seattle, back to Chicago. We toured Washington and Oregon with my cousin Margaret and Bob Jones. We had a wonderful vacation. Well, when the four of us got back to Chicago, Aunt Jane was on a different flight than us, and she was in a hurry. At the taxi line, it was a madhouse with nobody in charge. 50 people were standing around trying to get a taxi. Aunt Jane hugs us, says goodbye, and walks into the middle of 10 taxis. She's just wandering around out there.
Dragging a suitcase.
dragging one little suitcase. us and 50 other people are watching this. Everyone is thinking that poor old lady has lost her mind. Next thing we know, Aunt Jane, the world traveler, jumps in a taxi, waves at us, and is gone. We started laughing and just stood in line for another 45 minutes. That was my quick story with Aunt Jane. It was a good one. There are lots of other ones.
Perfect.
Time for Pat Cazort to talk.
Yes, please, Aunt Pat.
All right. This is when Fred retired from the FDIC. Jane and Ann and Fred and I went on lots of trips, and most of them were down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where Ted and Sarah lived. And so this trip, we were out there, and after lunch, we three ladies took naps. And Jane and Ann took their naps, and then I was to watch Fred while they did. They got through with their nap, they got up and put me to bed, and I was sound asleep. And all of a sudden, Jane runs into the room, Pat, Fred fell in the lake. And so I ran out there to see what in the world I could do. I couldn't swim a lick, but they three could swim. Fred got out of the lake, got back into the boat, and came to the house. We have laughed many times about that, and many more stories that happened on our trips. We had wonderful times together. I loved every minute of it.
Hello, Pat. This is Jane.
Hello,
Can you hear
Jane.
me? It's so good to see you. What fun.
I'm so glad to see you too.
We talk on the phone, but we don't see each other ever. How nice.
Jane, you look so pretty. You still look like a young girl to me.
Oh, thank you. Well, to everybody listening that doesn't know me, I was married to John Guy Jr. Cazort. I'm Aunt Jane's sister-in-law. Thank you very much.
Oh,
wonderful to see everybody. Yes, indeed.
Aunt Janie, good to hear from you, and you're one of our favorite in-laws.
Thank you. You're certainly mine, without a doubt.
So next in line, I think, Martha, I see you next. Do you want to unmute? And
Yes, I have a couple of stories. One is my husband has slept with Aunt Jane. When we were stationed in Northeast Arkansas in Blytheville, Billy would go down before he retired. He would go to weekend school in Little Rock to get another degree. So he would stay with Aunt Betty. And it just so happens that Aunt Corky and Aunt Mima were there. And, they all had dinner, and Aunt Jane was there. And then they literally all went in and tucked him in one at a time and brought him something to eat. And so he said that he slept with my aunts. And another story about those aunts, I knew that Billy loved me and was going to marry me when we were in Little Rock, and he ordered dessert, and it was a chocolate brownie ice cream whipped cream thing, and we were in a circle in a horseshoe, and Billy and I were on this end, and my parents, Aunt Jane, Aunt Mima, Aunt Betty, Aunt Corky, and I said Aunt Jane, they brought the dessert with 8 spoons and started on the opposite end, and everybody took some of Billy's dessert. And I knew then, when he didn't say anything and he didn't fuss, I knew he loved me. And Aunt Jane and I are Democrats. And so during the Whitewater scandal in 1994, when Susan McDougal was arrested, she called me and said, Martha, don't worry about me. They're arresting all the Democrats in Arkansas, and I have my bag packed by the door. And another time she called me, it was in 2008, when the Republicans it was during the Republican primary. There was McCain, Huckabee, Romney running, Fred Thompson, Ron Paul, Alan Keyes, Rudy Giuliani. Anyway, she called me and said that she had called the National Republican Party in DC and said, I am Jane M. Cazort, a Democrat from Arkansas, and I congratulate you on the worthless presidential candidates you have. I'm going to talk, I have one more story, I think. And I told you I grew up at these reunions, literally. And I have watched my father carry one of the cousins. She was her rheumatoid, her arthritis was too painful for her to walk. And I watched my father carry her to the car and then carry her to the reunion and sit her down. So when Aunt Jane was in Nashville, I'm in South Carolina, so we drive to Nashville and spend the night and then drive on into Little Rock. And it was our honor to carry Aunt Jane to the reunion. But each year we did it, lunch was a little bit longer and a little bit longer because she was a little bit weaker. And I noticed that her handicap sticker was like from 2002. And she said, I said, Aunt Jane, your sticker's expired. And she said, look at me, I'm 100 years old. Is anybody going to doubt that I'm handicapped? And then that's the end of my story. Oh, and when she died, I don't know if you remember, but I don't know if Aunt Willie Mae started it, but they started putting rubber bands on that doorway, the doorknob of the door that led down to the basement. And I mean, you could hardly turn the doorknob. There were so many rubber bands there. So when Aunt Jane died, I started collecting rubber bands on the doorknob. And I said that to Jane Hardy. One more thing, and I enrolled Aunt Jane in the Women's Military Memorial, along with other Cazort relatives. And my notes say, and someone has to tell the turtle story. Love y'all.
Thanks, Martha. Beth, I see you next.
I'm Beth Cazort Young, and I'm one of Aunt Jane's nieces. My father, Guy Cazort, was one of her brothers, and I'm proud to say Guy Cazort was also my brother who read the Bible verse earlier. So anyway, I want to thank Jane Hardy so much for all her weeks of hard work to put all of this together, the slideshow, but just all the details. I know she had help, but she was really the force in this. So thank you, Jane Hardy. Anyway, I just have a couple of stories. Aunt Pat always said that the Cazorts were born with a suitcase in their hands. And that's so true. Definitely we got that from Aunt Jane. And there was nowhere she wasn't ready to go. We invited her up here one time. She must have been in her early 90s, I think. And we live way out in the boonies, and it's to get here to the airport at that time, it was a little itty bitty plane, and they often flew in thunderstorms, and it could be a wild ride. And I warned Aunt Jane, I told her that this was a possibility. Would that be a problem? And she just, she was disgusted. She went, honestly, how do you think? And after, of course, everybody seeing that slideshow, you can realize that she couldn't believe I would ask such a question. And then she followed that with, and honestly, at my age, what difference does it make? So anyway, she was really ready to go anywhere at any time. And somebody had grumbled that, why did you come up all the way to visit Beth and Lauren? And she said, well, they invited me. And that's all you had to do was just invite her to go anywhere. And she was there. And she certainly passed that on to me. When I was in college, for some reason, she invited me at the very last minute to visit her. She was going to the Grand Canyon, and I don't know if her traveling companion bailed at the last minute or what happened. But anyway, she called me and said, well, I'm going to the Grand Canyon this weekend, and I'd like you to come visit me. And I had a paper to do that weekend, and she just wouldn't take no for an answer. She says yes to traveling all the time, and she just said, well, bring your materials with you and you can write the paper while you are there. And so of course, I had to go. I went and had a wonderful time. Thank you, Aunt Jane, for just that spirit of going and saying yes to traveling. So anyway, I found a poem. Who has poems written about them? But Aunt Jane had a poem about her published in a book. It's by Joan Loveridge Sanbonmatsu. And it's a long poem, mainly about her Red Cross experience, but I'll just read the last little bit because that's all I'll be able to do before I start crying. The poem is called Azalea Blossom, and it's like the coral azaleas blooming in Little Rock in springtime. Jane thrived in Red Cross in England, France, and Germany. A flower, independent, venturesome, and lovely. That's it. Thank you.
Beth, that's wonderful. Thank you. And to Kate Williams.
Sure. Yeah, I am Marge Gully's granddaughter. And Marge Gully was in the American Red Cross with Jane. So it's awesome to see all of you who I've seen at our COA meetings over the years, and really good to see you after all this time. So I just wanted to say that it was awesome to know Jane through our COA and through my grandma, and hear about the incredible experiences that you've seen throughout the service. They were all pretty awesome women. And that I think one of the things that being at those meetings with them taught me was how, like, World War II in particular, and being in those experiences formed really tight bonds that are obviously still present in this meeting today. And, I got to go to France with my grandma and Jane and others from the American Red Cross. And one of my favorite memories was watching my grandma and Jane walk down the cobbled streets in Normandy, later on in their years, a little hunched over, a little wobbly, but holding each other's hands. And it was so touching to see how close they still were, and how brave they still were. So thank you.
Kate, thanks. That's a perspective not many of us have, so that's great. Thank you. Rob Hardy, I see you raising your hand. You didn't do it by technology, though.
Hello. I'm Rob Hardy. I am one of the nephews. We've heard a lot about the wonderful things Aunt Jane has done for us. I'll tell you about one that I did for her. Aunt Jane, as people have mentioned, was very well read, and one of the authors that she was a fan of was Anthony Trollope, the Victorian novelist. I am too, though not as big a fan as she was. And we were talking about one of the books he wrote. He wrote 43 or 47 novels. And Jane and I were talking about one of them. And I asked Aunt Jane if she had ever read Trollope's autobiography. And she didn't know that such a thing existed. And so I was able to order it on Amazon and get it sent to her. And she loved it. And she should have. She would have loved it. It's a wonderful story. Anthony Trollope had a terrible upbringing. He blossomed when he became a postal official and took up writing novels and fox hunting. And so she was crazy about the autobiography, and I was able to introduce that to her. So if any of you want to pay a reading tribute to Aunt Jane, pick up any of Anthony Trollope's novels and go through it. They're all wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Go Navy. All right, now I can't see anybody else. Yvonne, is that you again? All right, you're on mute.
Now I'm muted. I thought of one little thing that nobody else has mentioned about Jane. We all know her love for travel and so many wonderful things about her, but in Little Rock at least, she was very anti-tech. She did not want a computer. She knew how to use one, but she did not want to have one. Oh, I see you waving. Yeah. And also I saw when I was visiting once from Ashburn, in the bedroom on the dresser was a cell phone. And I said, oh, you use cell phones now? She said, good heavens, no. She said, my nephew Alan gave it to me and showed me how to use it, but I have no use for it. I'm not ever going to use it. And I think later on somebody else gave her a cell phone and tried to convert her, but she would not do it. She also did not want cable. So she was so very adamant in all of that. I don't know if anybody ever convinced her later, but I was very amused, as intelligent and sharp and curious as she was, why she spurned the tech. That's all. And thank you for this wonderful, wonderful event here where we celebrate Jane. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I
All
go,
right,
Jen?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so I want to follow Yvonne with cousin Jeannie Cazort sent a note the other day saying, I have a funny remembrance of Jane. When she was going to move to Nashville from Mississippi, she told me about the place where she would live and said, you can look it up on that thing you all use. So I did, meaning her computer or her phone. And that reminded me that Aunt Jane used to call texts twixts. She said, just twixt it. And we would say, okay, all right. And Marty said, someone needs to tell the turtle story. So I'll start it. If I mess up, help me out. So Aunt Jane was driving down University Avenue, and maybe she was 85 or 90. And she saw a box turtle crossing the road. And lots of people, lots of you, especially if you have Cazort blood, you pick up a box turtle and help it across the road. So she did. Robert does. All of us do. So she got out and she parked her car, got out, was picking up the turtle, and she fell and her wig came off. And a policeman came and helped her up, and she was so embarrassed about her wig, but she said, don't worry about the wig. You helped that turtle across that road. So I think that's the story. And I don't want this to end without us saying that Guy Cazort Sr., Aunt Jane's father, said often 4 of our children graduated from college and 1, Jane, was well educated. So that was before she graduated from college at 60 years of age. So that may not be the last story that's going to be told. I don't know, but I do want to say that she asked that there be a memorial service at First Methodist, and of course she thought we would all be together. Well, not all of us, but she thought we'd be together in person. And I'm so grateful to Donna for setting this up virtually, and it is one positive aspect of the pandemic. There are not many, but it's been wonderful that we could all be here. And I do hope, if you meant to tell a story or you just couldn't do it, please send it to me. I'd love, I have a scrapbook, and I'm gonna We'll be still collecting stories, so please do. So I'll give it back to John now.
Thanks, Janie. Can anybody see anybody else that wants to say something?
Caroline.
Caroline, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, Caroline.
Oh, shoot. I said hi, and now the dog thinks someone's here. I'm Caroline Webb Clark, and I was Great Aunt Jane's great niece. Sorry for the silly dog.
It's okay. The dogs won't bother us. Just speak.
I got to have Aunt Jane in Nashville. And the day before my son was born, I took Aunt Jane to the Frist, to an art museum, and then afterwards to go eat a hamburger or something she had chosen for us for lunch, rotiers for any of y'all that are familiar with Nashville. And that night I went into labor and had my little boy, Hardy Chapman Clark, and he and Aunt Jane were fast friends from truly the day I was home from the hospital. And then we visited Aunt Jane weekly at Richland Place and knew all the people and did lots of hard work with drills on her wheelchairs. And that's Libba talking right now, Elizabeth McIntosh Clark, for Aunt Jane's namesake. But Hardy and I were also the very last people to get to see Aunt Jane on her 105th birthday. We were the last people to get to see her and the last people allowed into Richland Place before it was shut down for the world. So that was March 9th, 2020. And so it was just neat and such a full circle thing for my small immediate family here in Nashville. And it was such a blessing to have her here because selfishly, I got so many of you as visitors. So it was just really special. And thank you to everybody who spoke and put this together. I didn't know how much I would love it and that I needed it. So thanks. I love y'all.
So, Caroline, we could not have done it without you. You being there to help Aunt Jane at Richland Place, and you and Hardy, it just made all the difference in the world. So thank you for all of that you did.
I just want to say, explain really how it was that I know all of you now, and that is simply because my mother and my stepfather were very close to Jane. Jane was working on one of the American bases. We lived in Oxford. My stepfather was a professor. Well, he was a don, but people think of him as a professor at Oxford. And my mother was born in Odessa, so she was regarded as a fiery Russian woman. She wasn't really, because she was half British and more British than the British. But Jane fell for both of them, and they had this amazingly close relationship. And I knew Jane when I was a teenager, and she was so fun and, frankly, so glamorous. I mean, that's the bit that ought to be said about her. She was very glamorous. And, of course, the overriding impression that she gave, remember, this is a long time ago. There weren't that many Americans in England at the time. So to have a real live American, glamorous American, was so exciting. And, you just thought, gosh, this is really one to at times just ask her questions. What's it like being American? Sort of silly questions. But she was wonderful to all of us.
Thank you. So will you tell quickly why you were in Washington, D.C.? You said it was a gap year?
Yeah. No, so I
arranged that?
Yeah, so what happened was that I very much wanted to go to America in my gap year. So I'd left school and I'd got into Oxford. So I just had about 9 months to fill in. And amazingly, Jane Cazort, the great Jane Cazort, persuaded Anne Hardy and Robert Hardy to take me to their home in Alexandria, just outside Washington. So I was there, but not only did they give me a place to stay, they gave me a job in a company called Commonwealth Carstone, or Carstone, you would say, making patio blocks. And I was meant to be the accountant. and I'm afraid we went bust as a company. But it did allow me after 3 months to travel across America, which I did. And I ended up in Washington, and I went to the March on Washington, and I was there when Martin Luther King made his I Have a Dream speech. So that was quite an experience for me. I was about to study politics at Oxford, and what a way to start.
Thank you. I didn't realize all of that. Thank you so much. And we're allowed to call you Johnny.
You can call me Johnny because that's what my family called me. And I then thought I ought to try and be sort of more serious and more effective as a person if I was called John. So I've been John in my professional life, and I've spent most of my life in the BBC. So people think I might be a broadcaster. I was a broadcaster, and I still am a broadcaster. That's what I do.
But people professionally call you John, and we call you Johnny.
You can call me Johnny because
I call him Johnny.
Yes, Mary calls
me. Oh, good, Mary.
I have not stopped hearing about wonderful Jane Cazort all my life. Never met her, and we've been married for 50 years. So I'm delighted to be a small part of this.
Please come over.
It is an amazing sort of a leap across the century, isn't it? To think that I'm talking about the last time I saw you, Jane, when you were 8 or 9, and you were obviously very pretty, little girl, but you were a little girl. I mean, you had to be. And cheeky, and you needed a certain amount of control. You had dark hair, but you were fun. I mean, you once played a terrible trick on me. I will tell you this trick, it's a very quick one. You thought it was funny to have a joke with a matchstick. So you got the matchstick going, so it was light, and you said, can a matchstick burn twice? And so the correct answer is no. And you then said, yes, it can. And so you blew it out and then plunged the burning matchstick onto my arm to see whether it would burn me. You thought this was terribly funny. I didn't think it was that funny. But it was certainly memorable.
She did that to me.
Quite memorable. Ooh.
She did that to you, Robert, yeah?
Many times.
Yeah, well, that's it. No, she had that. We had to be frank about that. There's no point trying to cover it up. You've got to be straightforward and tell these stories because they live on.
Oh, I didn't tell one story. So Aunt Jane, grandmother told this story. Speaking of people being horrible. So Aunt Jane worked at the Red Door as a volunteer, thrift shop in Little Rock. And grandmother said that one day she was working the cash register and a man came to the cash register and pretended he had his gun and pointed the pretend gun at her and said, "Give me your purse." And she said, "I will not get out of here." And he did. He left. My grandmother was horrified. She didn't want him to go. She didn't want Aunt Jane to go anymore, but Aunt Jane kept going. So we'll put that in the recording too.
Well, also, I think that didn't she take her hand and push the gun away? Like it was pointed at her, so she put her hand and just pushed the gun away and said, "Don't do that."
Okay, we should get you telling the story. Exactly. I think you're right. Good. I'm so glad.
How old do you all think Aunt Jane was then when she was fending off robbers?
Well, she was older than 60 because she graduated from the W when she was 60, and then she moved to Little Rock. So she was probably 70.
Yeah. Yes.
And I thought she said something to the young man about what would your mother think if she knew you were doing this? Oh, yeah. Does anybody remember that?
Yes, yes, now I do. Perfect. We've got to put the story together again. That's great. That's why he left. She shamed him. Gosh, what else did we forget?
I think that's it.
Well, I just have one. I'm Tina Cazort Camp. My dad was Lee Cazort. So she was cousin Jane to me. my brother Bill would house sit for when she would go on her trips. So he house sat a lot. And he was telling me about, the old rotary phone and how, her house just was not updated at all. And he said, you have to come over and see this house for yourself. And the two dogs were there, and it was kind of amazing that she when someone said about she was anti-technology, I believe that, because her house it was kind of amazing. So that's all I had.
Thanks, Tina. Goodness, you're patient.
Oh, it's been a delight to sit and be a fly on the wall. Your family is just a treasure. I have done countless funerals across the years, and this ranks high among my favorites. It's just
Well, thank you again. Your help has been just great.
We had as many as 74 people. It's a pretty good gathering.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
all right. May peace and
Thank
joy
you.
continue to be
Thank
with
you,
your world.
Jane Hardy. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Love to each of you.
Bye all.